Your favorite local grocery stores like Kroger, Ralph's, Fred Meyer, and more are now delivering on Uber Eats. Get 40% off your order of fresh, quality ingredients. Whether you just got home to an empty fridge or suddenly got a craving to whip up something new, you can get everything you need delivered in as little as 25 minutes. Get 40% off your order with code Kroger2026. Plus, members get $0 delivery fees. Order now on Uber Eats. Orders of $30 or more save up to $25. Ends 4/30/26. See app for details.
Here at Blue Apron, we've been thinking a lot about the whole cooking thing. And we've decided you shouldn't have to cook. Introducing Dish by Blue Apron. Pre-made meals that are ready in 5 minutes or less. At least 20 grams of protein, a good source of fiber, and no artificial flavors or colors. Shop Dish by Blue Apron at blueapron.com. Get 50% off your first 2 orders with code APRON50. Terms and conditions apply. Visit blueapron.com/terms for more.
Hello and welcome to Haway The Podcast. It's Martin here and you join us for another episode of On This Week, where we trawl back through the rich and varied history of Sunderland Association Football Club and pick out some of the momentous and maybe some of the not so momentous things that have happened over the years that combine to make up the rich tapestry of our football club. And of course, it wouldn't be an On This Week episode without my 2 very esteemed colleagues. So first of all, we'll say good morning to Kelvin Beattie. Hello, Kelvin.
Ooh, caught me out.
I know I did that deliberately, because you see I always want Andrew first.
I'm just sitting there drinking, I nearly choked on me coffee there. Morning, listeners. Ready for this one. Tons of good stuff.
Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff. And obviously joining myself and Kelvin is Andrew Smithson. Morning, Andrew.
Morning. I've been relegated, have I, to second place. I can take it. I can take it for Kelvin. Kelvin's worth top billing, I think.
Just keeping things fair, that's all. Keeping things balanced.
People need to settle down for the long haul today. We were talking before press and record. There's all sorts to cover, isn't there?
Well, we've almost done half an hour before press and record, haven't we? So that's the pre-show. And Andrew, you left us with a quiz question about the 1st of March last week.
Yes,
of course, covering the 2nd to the 8th of March today, but the 1st of March is almost within the realms of that.
I hold my hands up. Maybe that's why I've been relegated in the lineups there. I got confused with the leap year when we were recording last time, and that caught me out. But yes, 1st of March 1999, the club announced plans to extend the capacity of the stadium, which was quite apt because that's something we're talking about in the current day again. The intention was to extend which stand, but the tricky element to this was I wanted the sponsored name, not the generic name of the stand or the subsequent names that we know it. I was asking what the stand was called at the time, boys. Either of you remember that one?
Well, it was the South stand that was the Metro FM stand, was it?
Yes, yeah.
And the North stand, is it either Carling or Foster's?
It's the Carling stand now. I think it's had a spell as the Cronenberg stand. It's the Carling stand now, although it very rarely gets referred to as that.
Yeah, never.
I've never said, I've got tickets in the Carling stand. I don't even know if the club still sells Carling at games.
If the North Stand gets extended, will it be longer than life then?
Well, at the time, it was sponsored by Vaux. It was called the Vaux stand. So when they doubled it in size, they should have called it the Double Maxim stand if they were thinking, Kelvin.
I've got no recollection of that whatsoever.
It was the Vaux stand, and the road that runs behind it is now called Vaux Brewery Way, is a bit of a tip of the hat to when Vaux closed down I think Bob Murray recognised the fact that Vaux had been long-term sponsors of the club during some difficult times. So he wanted to recognise that. At the time as well, I don't know if you remember this then, Martin, but the East Stand was called the McEwen's Stand.
Yeah.
So we had rival breweries sponsoring parts of the stadium.
There was
So
no exclusivity there, was there?
No. And as well, I think McEwen's was Scottish and Newcastle.
Yeah.
So I don't know how that would fly nowadays. People maybe weren't as precious back then. So there you go. It was the Vaux stand, and people are now sitting in the Carling stand. But well done if anybody can find much reference to it. Aye. So there you go.
Very good.
Short and sweet, that one.
Good man. Yeah, no, that's been erased from my memory bank, that one. I'll have to see. I'm even though I completely believe you and trust you, I'm still going to go and dig out the programs from that season and have a look just to reconcile it with myself. We will get cracking. That was March the 1st, so we've gone back to last week, and that's all fine. March the 2nd, we will start this episode on. In 1870, Jimmy Miller, who went on, of course, to play 260 games and score 128 goals for Sunderland, was born in Ayrshire. 1922, we broke the British transfer record by signing Mike Gilhooly from Hull City for a fee of £5,250. Now, remember that. March the 2nd, 1922, broke the British transfer record, because we'll come back to that later. He only actually played 19 games for us. He broke his leg, which ruled him out for a long time, and he didn't actually feature that heavily for us. But yes, he was he was a British record transfer holder and our record transfer signing for a little while. But again, we'll come back to that date. 1963, Sunderland played Newcastle at Roker Park. There was 62,420 spectators in the ground, and that's the highest league attendance for Sunderland at Roker Park outside of the top flight. 1974, this was one of the games that took a little bit of time in the pre-show when we were discussing things this week, because Sunderland played Middlesbrough at Roker Park. And on the face of it, we got beat 2-0, and that doesn't sound like a game that you'd want to delve into too much. But both Dennis Stewart and Bobby Kerr was sent off for protesting Middlesbrough's second goal. Now, the referee was a chap called Bob Raby from West Yorkshire, and Dennis Stewart was actually booked for protesting the first goal. So there'd been a handball in the Borough box. Sunderland thought they should have had a penalty. Borough broke, went down the other end and scored. Dennis Stewart was apoplectic, got a yellow card for that. For the second goal, there was a foul apparently in the build-up, but Middlesbrough went on and scored. Dennis Stewart, who got his first yellow card for protesting the first goal, protested vehemently against the referee, got a second one and got a red card. Bobby Kerr had also been booked in the game. He protested a bit too much, so got a second yellow and got a red card. And Jimmy Montgomery also got booked for protesting the second goal as well. So there was all sorts of shenanigans going on. I feel a bit sorry for Dennis Longhorn, because he came on, made his debut for the club, but everything has been overshadowed by the yellow cards and red cards and controversial goals, and Mr. Bob Raby wouldn't have been the most popular person on Wearside, I dare suggest. 1991. Now, in this season up in the top flight, 1991 season, Sunderland had a habit of throwing leads away. And this was evident at the baseball ground as we went 3-0 up in 23 minutes. Derby were one of the clubs who were down there scrapping with us to try to avoid relegation, along with Luton Town and one or two others. And we went 3-0 up in 23 minutes at the baseball ground. Now, if you think of that, coming into March, you've only got a little bit of the season left to play. This is when things are really heating up. To go away to your relegation rivals, go 3-0 up in that space of time, you think, bloody hell. Gordon Armstrong, Marco Gabbiadini and Kevin Ball got 3 goals there. Dean Saunders got a hat-trick. So before half-time, he'd notched 2 goals on 37 minutes and 45, which puts a completely different complexion on the game, doesn't it? And then 75 minutes, he got a penalty, stuck that one away, and the game ended 3-3.
You've just brought back a very unhappy memory there. Me and our young'un decided at the last moment to go to that game, and we had some trouble with the car and got into the ground. when we were 3-0 up, so we missed all three of the goals. And then watched Dean Saunders work his oracle and came out of the ground, got back into the car and drove all the way home again. It wasn't a very nice day that I seem to remember getting back into the car soaking and driving all the way home with the lip on.
So what we're saying here,
Thankfully,
Kelvin, is you were to blame. Like if you hadn't gone to the ground, you obviously shifted something in the balance of the world. We would have won that game. We'd have stayed up. In that course of history, we wouldn't have had Terry Butcher. We wouldn't have Mick Buxton. We wouldn't have had all of that crap if you just stayed at home or got there on time.
Well, where were you dishing out that advice when I was heading down to the grow? Why didn't you just ring us up and tell us?
Could have sent some smoke signals or something back in 1991, couldn't we? 1999, Sunderland beat Portsmouth 2-0 at the stadium. Like Danny Dickio and Kevin Phillips with the goals. And in 2002, we got beat 2-1 against Spurs at White Hart Lane. But it's memorable because Patrick Mboma scored his only goal for the club. Gus Poyet opened the scoring for Spurs on that occasion. Des Ferdinand got the other goal. And Maurizio Tirico, who was obviously Poyet's assistant at Sunderland, was also in the Spurs team that day. On March 2nd, 1984, Sunderland sacked the manager, Andrew. And it was a decision that it had a bit of a story to it, didn't it? It wasn't the most straightforward or the most popular decision.
No, you're dead right. Invariably, when a manager goes, the majority of the fan base are happy with the decision. They think the time is right. They've had their fill of whoever's getting the bullet. But this decision is one that it's still talked about now. I mean, I remember, I've said in the past, I often heard a lot of my Sunderland history waiting outside the newsagents on a Saturday night for the football echo to turn up, and the old boys would be talking about the stories and bringing up the old memories. They would often talk about Alan Durban's departure and still be incredulous about it. And that must have been more than a decade after it had happened. So this did really cast a shadow over the club for a long time. Now, I've dug out some snippets from a piece in the Chronicle by Paul Hetherington from the day he was given his marching orders. And this was quite interesting to me. The story of Alan Durban being sacked was front page news on the Chronicle. I can't imagine the Chronicle now being too bothered for a Sunderland AFC story taking up their main headlines.
The Chronicle and Journal used to be 50-50.
Yeah.
Very much so.
Yeah.
And there's mag rags now, aren't there?
Well, they are, and that's a pod in itself as well. I mean, if you'd got me talking about this before we'd hit record, we would have been on for more than half an hour.
Did the Hetheringtons not have a little bit to do with that in the Chronicle and the Journal? Was Len Hetherington and Paul Hetherington both? Yeah. Were they not Sunderland? I always felt like they were leaned towards Sunderland, them two.
Well, funnily enough, a story that I might touch on later in the episode, if we get time, that covers some quotes from Len Hetherington. Were they father and son, Kelvin? I was going to ask.
Yeah,
I have no idea.
I think they were.
Yeah.
Oh, well, I mean, good on them if they were Sunderland fans and they were fighting the cause for us on Tyneside back in the day. Good luck to them. But nowadays, I couldn't tell you who the Sunderland correspondent was on the Journal or the Chron, but there was lots of famous writers wrote for those papers for Sunderland back in the day. So yeah, March 84, we are front page news. This article refers to Alan Durban being sensationally sacked just 24 hours before tomorrow's important game against Arsenal at Roker Park. The 42-year-old, I mean, I'm older than 42 now. There was no way I was getting the Sunderland manager's job when I was 42. The 42-year-old former Welsh international, who had been in charge at Roker for almost 3 years, was summoned to a meeting with Chairman Tom Cowie, who was a pod regular. We often talk about Mr. Cowie. He was summoned to a meeting when he arrived at the ground this morning and was told that he'd been relieved of his job. Incredibly, Durban revealed that only 5 weeks prior, he had been verbally offered a year's extension of his contract that was due to expire in the summer. So the timing's very interesting, and as I say, we still talk now about whether the decision was right. But if the fella's contract was about to run out anyway, I'm surprised Cowie decided to pull the trigger on him. You know, it seems a bit. It seems as if maybe Cowie already had an idea of who he wanted to come in and replace him, and maybe, I think, did you say, Martin, that we suspect that those wheels had already been in motion?
Well, yeah, if you do, if you kind of dig into it a little bit, I got some stuff from the Journal about this, and the contract offer that Durban was given, the extension offer, was at the same rate that the same salary rate that he took over the club on. So when he took over 2 years previously, he actually reduced his salary that he was on at Stoke by $5,000. So he was on 35 grand a year at Stoke, and Sunderland offered him 30 grand a year. He said when the offer of the extension came in, it was at that 30 grand a year mark, which he said suggested to him that there wasn't the conviction really behind the offer. The desire to keep him there wasn't as great as he would want it to be. So he'd not taken up the offer. He kind of left it to one side and just thought, we'll crack on and see where we get to, which obviously set sort of wheels in motion in the boardroom. So they would have thought, well, if he's not going to sign that, we're going to have to go elsewhere and have a look. So, maybe it's one of those things to some extent that obviously Len Ashurst comes in, doesn't he? And whether Len Ashurst was saying, well, I'll take the job now. Let me have the last couple of months of the season. It puts me in a better position for the summer. And they made the change. You can read a few things between the lines, can't you? But yeah, the Alan Durban felt the desire to keep him wasn't great. It wasn't what he would want it to be.
No, that's fair. And again, if you go back to the archives from the time, or you talk to people whilst you're queuing up outside the newsagent for your newspapers, there had always been this feeling as well that Cowie and Durban hadn't got along too well. I don't think Durban was ever Cowie's man, as it was. So yeah, perhaps this contract offer was used by both parties. The club have thought, well, if we offer him a contract and it's not that attractive, we can at least say to the fans that we tried. So yeah, obviously there was a bit of horseplay there and a bit of to-ing and fro-ing.
Well, Andrew, just to build on that a little bit, it was talked about in the immediate aftermath that there was a breakdown in the relationship between Durban and Tom Cowie. And Alan Durban's quoted as saying, I remember Jimmy Adamson saying there was someone who should have been knocked out of the club. Everyone thought at the time it was Bobby Kerr, which is a whole other thread to pull at some point. Said, but that person is still here. I know my departure will make someone in the senior position in this club very happy. Good luck to him. So there's obviously some, fractious relationships at best behind the scenes. And another just interesting thing before I pass back to you, he said he was obviously manager of Stoke prior to coming to Sunderland. He said, I said in 78-79 when Sunderland failed to turn up at Stoke because of snow, that it would have been an insult to a Sunday League team to say Sunderland will run like that. But nothing has happened in my time here to change that opinion. So he's fairly scathing of the way the club's been ran. So I think you can pretty much figure out where the issue from Alan Durban's perspective at least lay.
Oh, without doubt. I mean, those are pretty strong comments to make. And again, I dare say a lot of people listening will be backing Durban up here, because it wasn't just Durban, clearly. It wasn't just Adamson. A few people all seem to butt heads with the same guy and have a rather fraught relationship. So yeah, it's fascinating going into all of these little side stories. The main article here talking about the departure being made official. Durban added, "Little things can change the overall picture. If our home game with Rangers, that's Queen's Park Rangers, hadn't been postponed recently, we might well have won that game, and that would have made the table look so much better. I think Sunderland weren't like relegation certainties, but relegation had always been in the background during Durban's reign. Everybody was quite pleased with how the club were progressing. They really enjoyed what he was doing, bringing youth through. But it did mean that sometimes Sunderland could kind of skirt with the relegation places. Again, that was used by Cowie to strengthen his hand. Now, this bit's quite interesting here, Martin, because it'll feed into another little snippet we'll end up going into. Sunderland's players, clearly shocked and upset, were called into a meeting with Cowie, who instructed them under the terms of their contract not to comment to the press. As I say, we'll come back to that in a moment. As Cowie hurried away from the ground, he said, "Pop Robson is in charge temporarily, but I have nothing more to say." Sunderland's official statement, released by General Manager Secretary Jeff Davidson, read, "It has been decided by the board of Sunderland AFC to terminate the contract of Alan Durban." So, yeah, I think that's quite a nice time, Martin, to dip into that other snippet you dug out. Do you want to do the honours, or do you want me to do them?
Well, yeah, because this one takes place after the game. So Sunderland play a game against Arsenal.
Yes.
Pop Robertson's in charge. We draw 2-2. And there's some comments in the paper the next day. And, obviously this article leads on Len Ashurst being appointed. And there's an interesting little bit actually in the article on the Saturday that talks about Durban getting sacked. That says, inside information, a middle-aged man walked into the head office of Sunderland bookmaker Gus Carter yesterday afternoon and placed 90 quid at 10-1 on Len Ashurst being the next Roker manager. So somebody had gone in straight away after Durban and had got the boot and put a good chunk of money on Len Ashurst being appointed. Apparently he had a 50 quid saver on Tommy Doherty as well.
Ooh,
So,
okay.
there might have been a backup plan there. But John Richardson in the Journal had been reporting on the game, and he said, one leading player told me, so this is obviously after the game, and says, Barry Beatty's gone into the dressing room on Saturday to try to take the heat out of the situation. Obviously, Barry Beatty's one of the directors at this point, and he says, I understand a number of senior players at the club are seriously thinking of their futures with Sunderland following the dismissal of Durban, because Durban had brought these players. People like Paul Bracewell had been signed from Stoke. Durban managed him at Stoke. Lee Chapman, Durban had previously had him. He'd brought him to the club from Arsenal. There was a number of players who Durban had a long history with and connections with. So the players were apparently furious, as we've touched upon. But John Richardson said, one leading player told me I turned up not wanting to play. I had no enthusiasm because of what had happened. That was the feeling with some others. But at the end of the day, we are professionals being paid good money, and we couldn't let the people who pay our wages, the fans, down. Once we were out there, we got on with the job. We are not happy about what has happened. So you can see this sort of situation that Ashurst is coming into. You've got this really, this huge discontent with the playing staff who evidently loved Durban, loved playing for him, thought he was doing a good job. It's a really interesting one with, what you're talking about at the start of this, Andrew, with the sense that this was a big mistake that, the impact of it resonated for years. And, you can kind of trace the next decade, really. You could make a really strong case that a lot of that doesn't happen if Alan Durban stays in charge then. But there's another piece, and this might have more of a reason to it, right? So you've got the results bit, and we hadn't won in the league in the calendar year. So you're going into March and we hadn't won a league game in January or February. So it's not as if the team were in great form. But there's an article about the revenue that Sunderland are getting through the turnstiles and whether this has been kind of pushed into, I think it has been pushed in by the board because the vice chairman, a chap called Ian Fraser, who I'd never heard of before, had spoken to the press. And he said, I'm personally very sorry to see Alan go because we've worked very hard with him for 2.5 years, but we are losing £10,000 a week because of the loss of fans, because of the type of football we are playing. So he's, and there's a whole load of other stuff that he says to the press, but he's pretty much laying the blame at the fans, or the attendance is dropping because it's not exciting enough, it's not entertaining enough, we're not bringing enough money in, losing 10 grand a week, which, if you consider Alan Durban's on 30 grand a year, to be losing 10 grand a week as a football club, it's huge. And, it's completely different times in terms of football finances. You haven't got the loads of TV money coming in. The revenue through the gate was that was the biggest income driver, wasn't it? You haven't got sponsorship would have played a part as well, but you've got this aspect to it as well. So I think it was Alan Durban who said, if you want entertainment, go to the circus, wasn't it?
Yeah.
So potentially those things didn't marry up from the board's perspective either.
One of the things I think about that time, I think what you've said's factually correct about the attendances. You just have to look at the stats on that to see that, the attendances, we were down. I wouldn't be surprised if we had an average gate of about 15,000, 16,000, would it be? Maybe for those seasons. What I think's harsh is you could just about look at any club over that period and attendance has dropped for other reasons. Clubs like Liverpool were, they weren't, if you look at their gates, some of their league games, they were getting 29,000, they weren't breaking the 30,000. I think it was only, even Man United took a bit of a hit during the early 80s. Even Man United took a hit on their gates. So there was a lot going on, not just financial instability for people generally, but we were in the grip of football hooliganism as well that was putting some people off from going to football. So there was some general things there that I think impacted at the time. And you're dead right about Alan Durban being, I think I've said a couple of times on this pod, watching his teams, you could really see what he was trying to do. But don't mistake that for it was really exciting, free-flowing football. It wasn't. It was hard, functional, designed to stop teams from playing. Does this ring a bell with anything that's going on at the moment? We were set up to, I always thought, set up to stop teams from playing and then take teams on the break, That's how I thought Durban liked to play, generally, to play his football. So some of that is correct. Some of what the board and Ian Fraser were saying, it is correct, but it's pretty hard to drop it all at Durban's door,
I think it's fair that you bring that up, and that's a fair point in that whilst Durban had a lot of support and people believed in the long-term project, the football wasn't necessarily the most exciting. But was there perhaps a feeling from the fans that well, we've paid the price of these younger players being brought in. We've seen them learning on the job. We've seen them make mistakes. Now they're established. Now we might see the benefits of that, and they might become more.
Absolutely.
You know.
Absolutely. You really felt like one of the I know I joke about this, but you were just waiting for Durban's team to kick on.
Yeah.
It felt like we could kick on, and that I have to say there's a bit of a frustration in that, because I really did think he had a bit of vision and a bit of a plan and a bit of a long-term plan instead of this short-termism that we'd been blessed with for one reason and another. You felt like he did have a plan, and he did seem to be able to motivate players. Bearing in mind, remember when Len Ashurst came in, allegedly one of the first things he said to that group of players was, the holiday camp's over. So that was what he came in with. Typical
Sounds like
Lenny
something
the
else that
Lion.
was said a few years later, wasn't it?
I'll take us back to the original article in a second, but this is a fascinating story to me. I love that it has all these different offshoots. Just quickly touching on the crowds as well. I mean, however, 1984 was the time of the miners' strikes. So, that's going to have a huge impact on Sunderland in particular in attendance, with regards to attendances. But that was a trope of Cowie's throughout. I think he got himself into bother a couple of times because he compared our attendances to Newcastle's and made suggestions that Newcastle's fans supported their club better than that. So it doesn't surprise me that is a narrative that's getting pushed out about dropping attendances, which, as you say, Kelvin, there was extenuating circumstances on that. So that seems a little bit convenient. This article, I'll go back to this article if I may. It refers to Pop Robson being in charge of tomorrow's game, that being the match with Arsenal. And there was another article saying one of Pop Robson's first decisions is to decide whether to play himself in the match, which I quite like. Martin, you touched earlier on the discontent amongst the players, and it's telling that Cowie has had to tell the players, had to remind them that under the terms of the contract, they can't speak to the press. He obviously was expecting a backlash. You read those interesting quotes from an unnamed player. That reminded me that at the end of this season, under Len Ashurst, the final game of the season, which I want to say was away at Leicester, I think again there was problems before kickoff.
Yeah,
where certain players were refusing to play for various reasons. So this was all bubbling over, and the reaction to Durban's departure took a long time to settle down. This article, it says that Durban, as he cleared out his desk in the manager's office at Roker Park, he said, I was verbally offered an extension of my contract, but despite that, I didn't feel they wanted me to accept it. More confirmation of something we felt earlier. The chairman said he thought the club was not doing well enough. When I came here, I knew what the chances were of success in the First Division. The odds were stacked against it, and the club's record in the last 30 years has proven this. My predecessors had tried to do a job on a short-term basis. Alan Brown was the only one who tried to build from a long-term point of view. So Durban knows his Sunderland history here. He's not just bleating out of annoyance at losing his job. I think he really felt invested in the club and had looked at what had gone on before. Taking into account the economic situation, again, that's something we've touched on, I decided that a long-term policy was best. And when you look at the number of young players we have now who are being honoured at every level by England, I think my methods were justified. But when we embark on the policy, there was little chance of immediate success. However, all I know is that when I arrived, there were a lot of liabilities. We now have a lot of assets in terms of young players. So you can see where Durban's coming from. The article then ends with Cowie was previously a champion of Durban, but significantly, the departing Roker manager said, "I have not had a working relationship with him for months, so this decision came as no surprise." Touches on the league form. Sunderland have gone 7 league games without a win and were knocked out of the FA Cup in the 4th round by Birmingham. But the former Shrewsbury and Stoke manager said, "We've had a lovely fixture list recently, haven't we? However, I fully expect the lads to win tomorrow and again in another home match against Queen's Park Rangers on Wednesday." That often happens, doesn't it? When you've got a couple of home games coming up, you bring a new guy in, you hope for a new manager bounce. Sure enough, we drew with Arsenal. We didn't beat them, but we drew with them. We did beat QPR, but eventually it all went south. Len Ashurst was in charge the following season when he had a very different policy. Rather than bringing through young players, he bought a lot of more established names. So yeah, everybody had this sense of, well, we've gone through the pain of letting these younger players learn their trade. Could we not have just waited longer to see that bear fruit rather than scrap the plan? It's a whole era of what ifs, and there is this whole sense of, was it the right decision? Just a very little article I found in August about Durban, just as to what happened to him in the immediate aftermath. We know what happened to the team and Ashurst coming in. And to be fair to him, he got us to a Milk Cup final, so I don't want to completely write him off or put the blame on him. I think he also found that he was being expected to do his work in a challenging environment. But Durban, former Sunderland manager Durban, has been working a miracle with a tiny non-league club while he waits to return to the professional game. So what Durban did was he hung around in the northeast and worked as a temporary player coach for free for County Durham side Willington. I don't know if you remember that at the time, Kelvin, but Willington had a bad time of it. They were struggling at the bottom of the Northern League. But Durban came in, was coaching for them. They'd won a few games. They'd gone to the top of the division. Durban was bringing himself on as a second half substitute in games. They asked him why he'd tipped up at this lowly pit village side, as the paper described him. And he said, "It looked impossible. I tried to do the impossible at Sunderland, so I thought, why not here?" So he obviously loved the game. He liked being in the region. He thought he'd lend a bit of a hand to Willington. And years later, Durban does come back to Roker Park, doesn't he? I seem to think he was a scout under Peter Reid for a while.
He was part of Peter Reid's staff, wasn't he?
Yeah.
Right, he was often on the bench as well as he was part of the coaching staff as well as other things. But I remember him also being in charge of Stoke in a game at the Stadium of Light.
Oh, okay.
So he had another spell back at Stoke later on in his career. But yeah, he was. I reckon it was the season that we got promoted under Peter Reid.
Right. Yeah. We did play Stoke in those early years at the stadium. What might have been? I think that's how you'd sum that whole little.
That was there's a lot of that with Sunderland, isn't there? What could have been?
Yeah.
But no, excellent. Very, very interesting. Dip into all of that because that's one that was a bit too early for me. I've read the book that David Snowden has written about that era. What's called "Give Me Tomorrow Today," which is very fitting, I think, for all of that. And yeah, it's a exceptionally good read. If anybody wants a bit more on Alan Durban's time in Sunderland, I can heartily recommend it. We'll take a very short break and we'll be back after a couple of ads.
How many discounts does USAA Auto Insurance offer? Too many to say here. Multi-vehicle discount, safe driver discount, new vehicle discount, storage discount, legacy.
How many discounts will you stack up? Tap the banner or visit usaa.com/auto discounts. Restrictions apply.
Welcome back to Haway The Podcast for another episode On This Week. Now, before the break, we mentioned on March 2nd, 1922, Sunderland broke the British transfer record. On March the 3rd, 1922, Sunderland broke the British transfer record. So twice in 2 days, we are splashing the cash. So on this occasion, we'd spent £5,500 on a right back called Warnie Creswell from South Shields. Now, you may remember we'd signed Mike Gilhooly the day before for £5,250. Warnie Creswell played a lot more games than Mike did. So Warnie Creswell played 190 times for Sunderland. Didn't manage a goal, but he was a good servant for the club. 1939 on March the 3rd. So this is 2 years, obviously, after we won the FA Cup. Johnny Cochran resigned as the manager. So, fantastically decorated manager in Sunderland terms, wasn't he? He won the league for us in 35-36. Obviously, won the FA Cup in 37. 38, we finished 8th in the league. And at this point, we'd just got beat 3-0 by Middlesbrough. We were 14th in the top flight. Johnny Cochran resigns. Club secretary George Crowe takes over. And whether this was by accident or by design, I presume it was by accident, he'd managed 500 games for us. So he'd gone on a very nice round number. He'd won 212 and drawn 122. So you can do the maths in terms of how many he lost. But a huge figure in the club, a hugely successful figure in the club. And somebody who, somebody who's not necessarily remembered as much as he probably, or honoured is probably the better word, as much as he should be.
It's interesting, isn't it, when you look back on it, at the length of time. He was that team that was so successful towards the end of the decade. It didn't happen overnight. He was there for a long period and slowly put those building blocks in place. It culminated in this remarkable couple of seasons. But then very quickly afterwards, I think we spoke last week about a couple of players who got injuries. I want to say, was it Jimmy Connor or Patsy Gallagher? I can't remember now.
Jimmy Connor and Bobby Gurney.
Jimmy Connor.
Yeah. So doesn't that often happen? The build up to a successful period is a lot longer than the collapse of it afterwards. I think, when everything then hits its peak, I don't know if suddenly then that all just very quickly starts to ebb away. But yeah, Cochran, an amazing figure in our history and somebody who should be recognised and remembered as one of the most significant figures we ever employed. I mean, even if nothing else, 500 games in charge. That is a remarkable achievement.
Pretty significant, isn't it?
Yeah, we'd finished second when you were talking about building. We finished second in 1934-35 in the league, and I think he did feel he was onto something. But obviously, the other thing that's there is the war. Kicks in, and I don't know whether that had anything to do with his decision or whether he just felt he'd taken the team as far as he could. I don't know. But it's a really big, not just 2 years, but 3 years, 3 seasons. He's 3 seasons between 34-35 and 36-37, isn't it? It's a really successful seasons. You might say we're most successful when you look at it happens, we're second, we'll win the league, and then we'll win the cup, that might be our most successful period, consistent period of success in terms of football.
The cup, Kelvin, certainly had been the holy grail for Sunderland for a long time. So the fact that he was the man that delivered it certainly felt like, well, that is a chapter in our history now done. We can put that away. I think the following season, we might have reached the semi-finals in our cup defence. So we did a pretty decent job of defending it as well. So yeah, maybe the fact that we'd got to the semi-final in 38, maybe by the time of the following year, maybe he thought this is going to be a prolonged period of success, and then that didn't come to pass. We'd come back to being nearly men again. Maybe that was a factor. Maybe he saw the way the team was going and that the squad were aging. So I never nice, is it? Never nice to consider a club breaking up and moving on.
No, that's right. 1956 we're going to move on to now, and this was an FA Cup tie, 6th round game, away at St James's Park. Sunderland beat Newcastle 2-0. Bill Holden scored 2 goals. And apparently we wore Arsenal-style shirts, red with white sleeves, which we haven't seen Sunderland don that sort of outfit too many times, Andrew, but at least it enabled us to wear red and white when we crossed the river.
Yes, that might have been part of the thinking, but yeah, there's some really good photos of that game. It was a huge occasion. 2 Northeast teams battling it out in the later stages of the cup. So yeah, there's some cracking photos knocking around. I think didn't we stop Newcastle's run of winning the cup in consecutive seasons by beating them in that stage?
Oh, I hope so.
I think I'm pretty sure that I've got my dates lined up there. And of course, up until more recent years, that was the last time we ever played that lot in the cup. We managed to avoid each other for a long period. But yeah, we'd stopped the holders from retaining their crown, and it was a huge occasion. Maybe it confused them that we were dressed as Arsenal. Maybe they thought they were playing Arsenal instead and got caught out.
That was the game, lads. That was the game, lads, that Billy Elliott spotted that Jim Schooler was wearing a knee bandage and whispered to Stan Anderson would better give that knee a bit of a try out. Newcastle ended up playing with 10 men effectively for a good hour of the game, I'm led to believe. But 2-0 will do.
Certainly will. 1973, Monty made his 459th first-team appearance. We played a game against Oxford, and that beat Len Ashurst's club record appearances. 1984, this Arsenal game that we talked about earlier, Pop Robson in charge after Alan Durban's departure. That was a 2-2 draw. Mark Proctor put us in front after 7 minutes. Charlie Nicholas and Tony Woodcock put Arsenal in front, but last-minute Gary Rowell penalty earned us a draw. 1996, Sunderland played Grimsby away. This was Peter Reid's promotion surge to the top of the table as we headed for the championship spot. Kevin Ball, Craig Russell, Phil Gray and Mickey Bridges got goals in that 4-0 win at Blundell Park. 2004, we beat Walsall away 3-1. Julio Arca, Kevin Kyle and Marcus Stewart with the goals. In 2007, Sunderland played West Brom down at the Hawthorns. Now, I don't know if you remember this, and it's quite funny to look back on, given Tony Mowbray's relationship now with Sunderland supporters. But Tony Mowbray was the West Brom manager. Roy Keane was our manager. Tony Mowbray was very confident about getting West Brom back into the Premier League, wasn't he? And we went down there and beat them 2-1. Dwight York and Stern John got our goals. There's a former Sunderland player got their goal. Do you remember who that was?
Darren Carter, maybe?
It was Darren Carter, that's right.
Darren Carter, yeah.
Paul McShane and Kevin Phillips were also in the West Brom team that day.
Oh, were they?
But after the match, Tony Mowbray wasn't magnanimous. It's easy for me to say, isn't it? He wasn't magnanimous in defeat, was he? He said, we'll play better football than them. We're the better team. And we'll see who ends up where at the end of the season. Of course, we ended up winning the league, which was At the time, he could put that in his smoggy pipe and smoke it, couldn't he? I wouldn't say that now.
I remember that for a long time afterwards, and that really did change my opinion of Mowbray. It was only then when he came to Sunderland and you got to see close up the type of guy he was. I mean, he's an impressive fella in all seriousness.
Oh, he is.
But yeah, at the time, I did remember feeling kind of put out by those comments. I think it's quite obvious to us now that all that had happened is somebody had nicked his bag of midget gems or whatever, and he was a bit short tempered because of that. Shouldn't have held it against him all that long.
I was just going to say Chocolate Tony had melted a bit by the time he got to us.
He has. He wasn't as prickly, I don't think, as he was in his early managerial days, was he, by the time he got to Stadium of Light? We will move on to March the 4th. Now, we've talked in the last couple of days about some signings coming into the club in 1922, and Warnie Creswell and Mick Gilhooly made their debuts for Sunderland versus Sheffield United as we won 1-0 with a Charlie Buchan goal. A chap called Jock Patterson also made his debut on that occasion. 1939, of course, we've just talked about Johnny Cochran leaving the club. The next day, we play Manchester United, beat them 5-2 at home under George Crow's leadership. Bill Robinson got 4 goals, and there was an own goal on that occasion as well. 1950, we drew a game against Newcastle at Roker Park, but that set our league record attendance. It was 68,004. So we set the record for the biggest crowd at Roker Park outside the top flight in that game that we referenced earlier in 1963, 62,420, and in 1950, there we go, 1950, the attendance was 68,004. 1961, Sunderland played a famous game, an FA Cup game against Tottenham. And this was a game where Danny Blanchflower said it was the loudest thing he'd ever heard, really. And I've actually got all of the quotes from Danny Blanchflower, which it would take me a good 10 minutes to read all of them, so I'm not going to do that. But he sort of talks about the atmospheres he remembers as being huge in his career. And he's saying, I remember sitting in a capacity crowd in Barcelona last season, watching Barcelona beat Real Madrid 3-1. I remember playing for Aston Villa against Newcastle and there being a bit of an atmosphere. He goes through a few at Old Trafford this season with 60,000 Manchester United fans packed in. He said, these and many more scenes of wild thrills I remember, but nothing I've ever heard equaled the intensity, that wild roar at Roker Park last week when Sunderland drew level with Tottenham in the 6th round tie. So Willie McPeet had scored an equalising goal at Roker Park. That as we fished the ball out of the net and the mad with delight Sunderland fans streamed onto the field, I began to realise what the man meant who coined the phrase an ear-splitting roar. What effect does it have on a player? How would you feel if an overwhelming crowd of people watched over you as you did your job, all of them cheering and jeering and hoping that you would fall down on the job? The wrath of such a hostile crowd hacks away at a fellow's nervous system, hounding his confidence and undermining his concentration and skill. The individual effect is a matter of degree, with each player dependent upon his temperament. The team effect is something harder to define, depending on the relationship and confidence the players have in one another. And he goes on to describe the impact mentally that the atmosphere at Roker Park had on the Tottenham team that day. And he keeps on going and going and going about the effect it has and how impressive it was. So he ends up saying, so they all turned up at Roker Park last week, hoping like mad to see their team do it and determined to urge them on. In the second half, Sunderland equalised and the big crowd went mad. I know the North East is a fanatical soccer area. I doubt whether it has ever seen such excitement before or ever will again. And, you know, for Danny Blanchflower, who was such a big name in football, to be prompted to go and write all of that for a newspaper column, it must have been bloody impressive, wouldn't it?
Fantastic. I think Bill Nicholson as well, the Spurs manager. I mean, that was the year that Spurs won the double and did it for the first time, I think. The first time any club had done that. Am I right in saying that?
Careful, Kelvin. Yeah. I think I made that mistake and we got corrected. I think it turns out it was the first time it was done that century, I think.
Century, right? Okay.
I'm pretty sure I've been had me
Brought up
wrist
about
slapped
that.
over that one
Yeah.
previously. Aye.
Okay, well, I doffed my cap to Corinthians. Bill Nicholson, he said about the double. He was about winning the double. You know that that game was the closest they came to not winning the double. That second half at Roker Park, when after Sunderland scored, they just, really, really took the game to Spurs. So no wonder Blanchflower was waxing lyric about it. He used to write well in his newspaper articles, didn't he, Danny Blanchflower? He was kind of a fruity writer. My dad always liked. He used to get us to read Danny Blanchflower's stuff. He always liked his stuff.
Just on the crowds there, you've mentioned a couple of huge attendances, and that one in the second division against the Mags. I think it could very possibly be one of the highest ever seen in the second tier. I can't imagine many clubs were pulling in more than 62,000 in the second tier. It is a bit of a shame that by the 80s, so 20 years later, we've gone from crowds of 60-odd thousand, and Blanchflower speaking so evocatively of how that crowd could impact what's happening on the field of play. We've then gone to early 80s where we've got 15,000 rattling around there. Now, you've got to remember that the Roker end was cut down during Durban's era. That wasn't his fault. That was nothing to do with the football, but it left a lot of the fans unhappy and feeling as if Roker Park was never the same again. So it just shows how much the game had changed. It shows that how over that era, Sunderland fans were getting used to, from the 50s being one of the biggest clubs in the country, to then kind of like this yo-yo side. So it's just, I don't even know what point I'm making. It's just interesting to note the differences between the conversations about crowds and how they impact the club between the 60s and then in the 80s. So it's perhaps disingenuous to point the finger at Durban when in that time period there's been a huge shift in culture of match-going fans and the club in general.
No, that's right.
So I've brought us back to Durban somehow without even meaning to. But remarkable quotes there from Blanchflower, and the Roker Roar clearly was at its peak just something magnificent to behold.
Well, given that you did bring us back to Durban, I will say that Alan Durban did manage Stoke City in our first season at the Stadium of Light. We beat Stoke 3-0, and Darren Williams and 2 goals from Kevin Phillips towards the end of the season. Neville Southall was in goal for Stoke on that occasion. And the highest ever Division 2 attendance, just to answer your question, there was actually an Aston Villa game, 68,029 in 1937, to see Aston Villa play Coventry.
Wow. Huge.
There you go. It's a little bit bigger than our record for Division 2, but not that much bigger. 1967, Sunderland played Newcastle at Roker Park, beaten 3-0. 2 goals from Bobby Kerr and another from George Mulhall gave us a win on that occasion. 1985, now we talked about the first leg of the Milk Cup semi against Chelsea a couple of weeks ago, didn't we? 1985, we went down to Stamford Bridge and we won 3. The headlines are obviously we won 3-2. Clive Walker got 2 goals and Colin West got 1. David Speedie opened the scoring for Chelsea, obviously Gary Bennett's best mate, saw red towards the very end of the game. But those facts don't really tell the story of that game, do they? There was things being thrown in the pitch. There was police horses going. I think there was a police horse in the penalty box when Clive Walker scored one of his goals, wasn't there? And there was just chaos.
Yeah,
I think is probably a polite way to describe it.
Clive Walker that night, he's obviously ex-Chelsea, and I don't know what the Chelsea fans were expecting. Were they expecting them to turn up and score an own goal for them? I don't know. But yeah, Bugger, I tell you, he played exceptionally well that night. He wasn't intimidated by the Chelsea crowd. He had a really, really good game that night, for sure. And yes, there was a police horse on the pitch. There was a Chelsea fan ran onto the pitch to try and get at Walker. I thought that was after his goal, but I was obviously watching the football and not watching the hooligans running on and what have you. But I think
well,
Walker,
you're right.
Yeah, I think Walker had scored. He'd certainly scored by the time I noticed the police horse. I'll say that to you. But yeah, what an intimidating, leery, brilliant night that was. It was all those things. I remember walking back to the bus after the game, and we looked like a Roman legion with our shields on our heads. With everybody was picking dustbin lids up because the Chelsea hooligans had got into a building site up down the street that they weren't allowed to go on, and these bricks and stone switches coming over the top on top of the Sunderland fans were being marched back to our buses. And I always remember as we were being marched, and I defy anybody to correct me on this. I'd noticed when the police set were way down the street that they were all on one side of the street, and it was the bit that was furthest away from the building site. And when the bricks started coming over, and would fairly quickly, I think one person picked the dustbin lid up, and everybody went for them, and we were like walking along like that. And I just looked to the side, and the police were walking down the far side of the street, but were kind of herding us into that side of the street, and I thought, what the hell are we doing on this side? Why don't we? Well, can we not come across there, It was a bizarre end to an absolutely, bizarre probably summed up that whole occasion. And the stories from people, with the grand pensioners in the seats were being threatened and abused. And I think players' wives and families were threatened. I think it was a horrible, horrible atmosphere that night. And horrible before the game and after it. I was ever so pleased to just get on the bus and get away out of there, happy in the fact that we'd won and we were on our road to Wembley.
There is a brilliant bit of time tease coverage the day after the Chelsea game. So once Kelvin's got home and battered and bruised, the following day, the main time tease news, must have been at 6 o'clock or whatever it is basically dedicated. The whole show is dedicated to the carry on at Stamford Bridge and the atmosphere. And I think it's Roger Thames talks about how even the press were being intimidated and all of that. That's available on YouTube. So if you've got a bit of time to sit down and watch that, that is eye-opening. I think they barely mentioned the result because it was just such a wild night. I was going to say off the pitch, but on the pitch as well, because you've got police horses around there. Just surreal.
No, it's interesting because obviously at that time there was this a lot more football hooliganism, and it was kind of getting worse and worse, wasn't it? Obviously kind of build up to a crescendo, as we know. But I've been watching a few episodes of the Big Match Revisited stuff on ITVX, and it's noticeable that at the end of pretty much every game I've watched, fans run onto the pitch. So you've got this kind of thing building up where the fans are actually feeling the part of the action to some extent. Even there was a Chelsea-Blackpool game, and there was a rough tackle, and 2 or 3 Chelsea fans ran on the pitch to remonstrate with the player who'd made the tackle. It kind of went uncommented on by the commentators. A couple of Chelsea fans aren't too happy with that one, huh? And it's like, now you just wouldn't say it, would you? So you kind of had this almost normalising of fans coming onto the pitch and being part of what was going on, which obviously is why they put fences up and everything, because they had to stop them coming onto the pitch.
Yeah. Having lived through that sort of era, and then I was struck at the game on Sunday, and I've commented on this before. You see, when a player scores a goal and goes running across, not to their own supporters, but runs across and kind of baits the fans, because he scored a goal. I'm telling you, in those days, you were running, if you scored a goal, you were running away out the road of, we had a player on Sunday that was sitting on the fence at the South Stand. I don't know if you caught that. He scored a goal and went to start on the fence at the South Stand, and the blimmin' stewards were having a right job. I'm not saying it's right, but I am saying that the players have got a bit of a responsibility there to not provoke that kind of thing.
Well, it just underlines how much things have changed as well, because as you say, if that had happened in the 80s, there would have been absolute hell on, wouldn't it?
Kelvin,
there would have been.
Another conversation we had before hitting record. You said you wanted to return to that type of atmosphere, Kelvin, didn't you? You think football was better when fans were kicking off at each other and hurling bricks and building materials. That's what you were saying, wasn't it?
Don't misquote me. Don't misquote me.
Now, and you preferred it when it was like that, and people felt scared to go to the games. That was you, wasn't it?
I never said that. What I did say was I've always enjoyed a meaty challenge, and for me, it's always been part of the entertainment in the game. I said nothing about supporters baiting each other and frightening each other and hooliganism in the ground. That's not my that's not my cup of tea. And if you say out like that again, I'll take you outside.
When Kelvin was saying he missed the games with a meaty challenge, he was talking about having to tackle a half-time pie at Roker Park, I think. On that note, we'll take a very short break. We'll go and get a challenging pie from behind the Fulwell end, and we'll be back after a couple of ads.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. Stop waiting around for the perfect candidate. Instead, use Indeed sponsored jobs to find the right people with the right skills fast. It's a simple way to make sure your listing is the first candidates see. According to Indeed data, sponsored jobs have 4 times more applicants than non-sponsored jobs. So go build your dream team today with Indeed. Get a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
Holiday presents, in the red corner, the undisputed, undefeated Weed Whacker Guy. Champion of hurling grass and pollen everywhere. And in the blue corner, the challenger, extra strength Holiday. Eye drops that work all day to prevent the release of histamines that cause itchy allergy eyes. And the winner by knockout is Holiday. Holiday, bring it on.
On December 12th, Disney Plus invites you to go behind the scenes with Taylor Swift in an exclusive 6-episode docuseries.
I wanted to give something to the fans that they didn't expect. The only thing left is to close the book.
The end of an era. And don't miss Taylor Swift, The Eras Tour, the final show, featuring for the first time the Tortured Poets Department. Streaming December 12th, only on Disney Plus.
Welcome back to Haway The Podcast for another episode of On This Week, and we're going to go back to 1964 now. Last week we talked about a draw at Old Trafford in the FA Cup. And a few days later, the teams met again, and there was an awful lot of people who descended on Roker Park, Kelvin. The official attendance was 46,000 or so, but conservatively, that would probably be about half of the people who were in the vicinity.
Well, I think there were estimates that there was about 70,000 people in the ground, and there was certainly, I saw a number of figures with regards to there being about 120,000 people in the vicinity of the ground. The queues had it was real cup fever stuff. The turnaround in the game, just 4 days meant that they couldn't make it all ticket. So I think season ticket holders got a ticket which guaranteed them entry to the game, and everybody else had to turn up. And apparently there were traffic jams going back miles. The city centre, the area around the ground came to a standstill. And as I say, estimates that there was 120,000 people in the vicinity of the grounds. The queues had started building up in the early afternoon of the game. Such was there was cup fever, and there was who were playing. Man United were X Factor at the time, as I said last week when we were talking about this team. They really were X Factor. There was, there were apparently 700 people, over 700 people required some kind of either first aid care or hospital treatment after the game. There was, there's photographs that you can still find of massive piles of shoes the morning after the game. People lost their footwear in the surges and the clamour in the ground. I always, whenever I see those photographs, I cannot help but think of it looks like something out of a concentration camp. That's how many pairs of shoes and odd shoes are piled up. And there were 2 people lost their lives. There was a teenage girl died on the way to the game, and there was an adult, a gentleman died in the stands at the game as well. There was an exit door at the Roker end got broken in as they started shutting some of the turnstiles, and people were climbing over the walls and climbing over. In the Roker end, then, the Fulwell end used to have it as well. It certainly had it when I started going in 65, 66. They had barbed wire on the fence, but people were climbing over, and then this exit door got caved in at the Roker end, and loads of people scampered in, rushed into the ground. So it was a situation that I think the police lost control of, that the club hadn't quite anticipated, and that all went a bit pear-shaped off the pitch. On the pitch, it was another stunning cup tie on the pitch. If you remember that we were winning 3-1 with 7 minutes to go at Old Trafford, and the game got pulled back to 3s each with Jimmy Munty semi-conscious in the goal on the pitch for this game. It was just as exciting, really, enthralling. The 2 teams were nigh on just the same. Sunderland were unchanged. Young David Elliott was still playing at half-back in place of Jim McNabb, who was injured. But Man United, Nobby Stiles was injured. And they brought a really interesting lad in, just shooting off at a slight tangent, if I can, but Phil Chisnell came in for Nobby Stiles. And you guys probably, that name might not mean anything to you, does it, Phil Chisnell? I'd always remember he was going to be the next greatest thing, the next big young thing. He was part of the Busby Babes. He's a really interesting character, because his first 3 managers as a young lad were Matt Busby, Bill Shankly, and Alf Ramsey. He played for the England under-23s. I mean, what a start. And he's noted as, up until his death in 2020, I think that was, he's the only player that transferred directly from Man United to Liverpool.
Yeah, right.
He's apparently the only player that's ever done that. So he was one of the Busby Babes. He was going to be one of the next best things. Matt Busby described him as the best passer of a ball in English football at the time that he was making his way into the game. And if you ever watch the very first episode of Match of the Day in 1963-64, he's the very first footballer that you see touching the ball on Match of the Day. Phil Chisnell, he's called. His career faded, but he came in for this game. I've shot off on a right tangent there. I just thought he was a really interesting name, and I can just about remember when I saw the name. I thought, "Well, I remember him being the next great young prospect." Anyway, drama off the pitch, drama on the pitch. Just to really quickly say, Nick Sharkey scores a goal in this game. He continues to terrorise Bill Foulkes and scores a great scissors kick on 41 minutes. But Dennis Lowe brings Man United back into it with a goal just after the hour, and it goes to extra time. And Maurice Sellers, he scores an own goal just after extra time kicks off. And the pressure on the Sunderland goal after that is immense. And it's literally in the last minute of extra time. Bobby Charlton, believe it or not, scores another headed goal. This time, Jimmy, you couldn't say that Monty was concussed. He wasn't. Bobby Charlton just scores this goal, takes it to twos each, and takes it to a third tie. An absolute epic for... I've spoken to some of the old boys on the bus that I love to chat to. I'm like Andrew, I'm not standing at a paper shop waiting on the green and or the pink coming. I'm sitting on the bus talking to these old guys down the front of the bus that won't buy a domino card or a football team on the, but yeah, bugger, they can fill your head full of stories of it. And this game's one of the games that a couple of the lads talk about the same. And I have to say once again, they say, and the press cuttings seem to imply, we were a second division team. The Busby Babes were X Factor. They were, the up and coming team, not just in England, but in world football. They were up and coming in European football. And we went toe to toe with them and just about beat them again. But we didn't beat them. And it went to a third replay. It just sounds an enthralling set of games, these are. Always, whenever I'm talking to people about them, I wish I'd just been a couple of years older and could have gotten to them games for sure. I think I might have put me wellies on though if I'd known what was going to happen rather than me Doc Martens that I used to like to wear to games, or me baseball boots from Woolies that I wore for long enough. But what a set of games, and what another enthralling game to be able to read about and talk about.
And there's a lot of FA Cup ties in this edition of On This Week, because obviously we're getting into the sort of the pointy end of the competition, aren't we? March the 5th in 1938, Sunderland played an FA Cup sixth round game at White Hart Lane against Spurs. This was in front of a record 75,038 people down in London. Rach Carter got the goal. We won 1-0. So again, an incredible game. We were obviously defending the FA Cup, having won it the year before. 1994, the first Polish chap to play for Sunderland made his debut against Notts County. Dariusz Kibicki. And I always remember, because he was on loan from Aston Villa originally, wasn't he? He signed permanently. And I always remember an interview he did on the radio after this game, it was after his debut. And to hear Dariusz in his Polish accent say the gaffer when he was describing the talks he'd had and what had attracted him to come to Sunderland, he said the gaffer. I'm not sure how common a term that is in Warsaw, but it was at Roker Park. We won 2-0. As I said, Craig Russell and Phil Gray with the goals. 2002 on March 5th, we beat Bolton Wanderers, who were managed by Sam Allardyce, 1-0 at the Stadium of Light. Former Bolton player Jason McAtee got the goal. March the 6th, 1920, we beat Middlesbrough 2-0 at Ayresome Park. Charlie Buchan and Charlie Crossley got the goals. Billy Ellis made his debut for the club, played 202 times and scored 32 goals. 1965, we beat Nottingham Forest at Roker Park 4-0. Nick Sharkey got 2. Harry Hood and Mick Hellawell got the other goals. In 1999, we beat Norwich 1-0 at Roker Park. We beat Norwich 1-0 at the Stadium of Light, not Roker Park, because Kevin Phillips got the goal. 2006, Mick McCarthy was sacked as manager. Obviously, we're coming to the end of that season. I think we've just been beating the Man City, hadn't we? And that was enough for Bob Murray, who, was probably more to blame than Mick McCarthy was that season. But Kevin Ball took temporary charge for the rest of the season. March the 7th, 1891, Tom Porteous became the first Sunderland player to be capped by England. This was a game against Wales that was actually held at Newcastle Road Ground, and that was his only cap for England. So whether it was a call-up to appease or attract the local supporters, or it was fully deserved, we'll go with fully deserved, won't we? England won 4-1 on that occasion. 1931, Bobby Gurney got a hat-trick as Sunderland beat Sheffield 5-1. Arthur Andrews and Billy Eden got the other goals. 5 years later, in 1936, we drew 3-3 against Everton. Now, we were 3-0 up at half-time. Len Duns, Bobby Gurney and Rach Carter got the goals to put us in front. Jack Jones, who we spoke about a few weeks ago on this pod, was in the Everton team on that occasion, and Dixie Dean got an equaliser. The famous Everton striker got the goal on 75 to level that contest. 1964, Rach Carter brought his Middlesbrough team to Roker Park, and Sunderland drew 0-0, but that kept us at the top of the league. And in 1984, Len Ashurst, who we spoke about earlier in the podcast, took his first game in charge of Sunderland, a game against Queen's Park Rangers, which we won 1-0, thanks to an own goal from North East lad Terry Fennick. In 1998, Sunderland played Stockport at the Stadium of Light, and Niall Quinn became the first player to score a hat-trick at the ground. Kevin Phillips got the other goal. Brett Angel, the former Sunderland striker, got the Stockport goal. There was 2 other players in the Stockport team with Sunderland connections, and one of them had started the season in the Sunderland shirt. Any guesses?
Chris
one of them's incredibly obscure, and I'd be incredibly impressed if you got one. But yeah, the other one started the season in the Sunderland team.
Chris Byrne?
Correct.
Didn't he get himself into a bit of legal bother? I think he got arrested breaking in to a pharmacy or something. So I think Sunderland were happy to move him on.
I think there was a few things. I think, if memory serves me correctly, he got arrested before a game at the stadium. Like that, he'd been named in the starting lineup, or he was due to be playing. It was a midweek game, and he was otherwise engaged. There was a lad called Stephen Grant, an Irish striker, who never made a first-team appearance for the club, but was around the reserves for a few seasons. He was also in the Stockport team that day. And I think he turned pro golfer, Stephen Grant. I think he retired from football fairly early to pursue a pro golf career.
Wow.
That's just off the top of my head. I'm going to have to check that next ad break, but that I seem to remember reading that at some point. Right. And in 2004, on March 7th, Sunderland beat Sheffield United 1-0 in the FA Cup in the quarterfinals to send us through to the semis. Now, for our next bit of a deep dive, we're going to go back to 1973, Andrew, and there was a bit of a transfer saga that was going on.
Yes, cheers, Martin. I've done a few transfer sagas, which usually end with Sunderland getting their man. But this one's slightly different because the player we are after doesn't come to Sunderland. So the transfer chase doesn't pay off. And something that always interests me from 1973 is this idea of sliding doors and how Stokoe's team comes together and players who had maybe been frozen out suddenly get their chance back in the side. And this is kind of sliding doors in the opposite way, because had this lad come to us, he might have been the one who ends up getting the fame and fortune from playing in the cup final. So yeah, Richie Pitt, for example, he was out of Stokoe's plans and then comes back in. This player could very well have been the person who was playing instead of Pitt. This is an Irish player called Hugh Dowd. Now, as you rightly say, this was a saga. This had rumbled on for ages. January 1973, Dowd had a 2-week trial at Roker Park. He'd impressed. He'd played for the reserves a couple of times. Sunderland really liked what they saw. The problem was, though, as well as playing in Northern Ireland for Glenavon, I think that's how you pronounce that, isn't it? Glenavon? That sounds... Glenavon, Glenavon. Just cut out whichever one's the incorrect one, please, Martin, and go with the other pronunciation. He was playing for them on an amateur basis and during the week living in Manchester, because he was taking training to become a teacher, then flying or getting the ferry back home for the weekends. And this issue comes up throughout the transfer negotiations, the fact that he's studying and he wants to get a qualification. He's always uncertain about whether he wants to become a professional footballer in this point in his life. So yeah, he'd had a trial. We were really pleased. We were desperate to get the deal done and to bring him to Sunderland permanently. By February, though, there's a lot of unhappiness that it hasn't been sorted. The Lurgan Mail, which is a big paper over in Northern Ireland, they are kind of suggesting there's a bit of unhappiness that this hasn't now happened, and maybe the lad's been left in limbo. But as the story continues, you find that it's not necessarily Sunderland or his parent club that are stalling. It's the lad himself who's dragging his heels. By the 10th of February, it's now being reported that the deal has been thrashed out and Hugh Dowd is expected to sign for Sunderland. That's backed up by an article in the Chronicle on the 12th, talking about Stokoe, saying how he's in crisis mode over a raft of injuries. Again, it's that sliding doors idea and how the 73 team almost falls together by accident. You've got David Young is out injured. Jackie Ashurst, who although was a youth team player at the time, he was being considered as a possible first teamer, and could the club bring him up from the juniors to replace David Young? Well, they can't, because he gets injured as well. Keith Coleman, he had been sent on loan to Arsenal, but he dislocated his shoulder, so he's back on the sick list at Roker Park. You've got long-term injury victim Bobby Park out. Mick McGivern is out. John Hughes, who we've spoken about on these pods previously, he's struggling with an injury that eventually basically brings his whole career to an end. So there's all sorts of injury headaches for Stokoe. So had we been able to bring Dowd in, you would have expected him to be coming straight into the first team environment and help bulk up the numbers. Not only had Coleman been brought back from his loan, but Richie Pitt was brought back from Highbury. He'd only been there a couple of days. He played in a reserve game for Arsenal against Chelsea, done really well apparently. So there's him thinking, this could be my opportunity to kickstart my career at Arsenal. Well, no, it's not, because there's problems back on your side. You're going to have to come back, please. I mean, it works out in the end for him, because he does get his way back into the side, but he's probably a bit confused at that point, thinking, well, what's happening here? Am I going to be a Sunderland player long term or what? Brian Chambers, another player who's at the club at that time, he was due to go on loan to Southampton. That has to get knocked on the head because of the shortages of players. So it's really desperate at that point that Dowd gets signed, sealed, and brought to Sunderland. There's all sorts happening, though. The deal keeps getting knocked back. There always seems to be an excuse or one more hitch, one more hurdle to cross. So it never quite happens. I noticed as well at this point in February, the club were trying to get a game against Bristol City moved because it clashed with the Grand National at the end of March. They wanted Sunderland's game to get moved to a Friday night, but we weren't given permission for that. And that just strikes home to me how back in the day, the FA Cup final and the Grand National were two of the biggest days on the calendar, and the whole country stood still for those events almost. But Sunderland ended up having to play the day of the Grand National. After that piece in the paper about Sunderland trying to get the game switched, the Chronicle, and this time it is Len Hetherington writing, he's saying that Dowd is expected to be done. He's expected to be coming to Sunderland, and the timing couldn't be better because he'll help in this shortage of players. Hetherington refers to him as an Irish amateur international at that point who was going to cost us £10,000. He tells us that St Mirren had a bid of 7,000 turned down. So Sunderland weren't the only club after him. Hetherington tells us as well, this is a player we don't know much about because of his background. He's not a big name in England at the time, but they tell us it's PE that he's studying to become a teacher of. He's obviously going to be able to give the kids plenty of good examples because he was a good prospect by all accounts. He was described as a ball winner and very good in the air. But at the same time, you've got some papers saying it's going to happen. The Belfast Telegraph are saying, no, they don't think it is going to take place. They're reporting that Charlie Ferguson, who's our chief scout at the time, he's been sent over to Ireland to try and convince him. Glenavon have stated they're happy to sell. They don't necessarily want to push him out of the door, but they could do with the money. The hold up at this point is that, again, it's this question over the lad being able to continue his studies. But Charlie Ferguson goes there and is trying to make him aware that just transfer your course. There's facilities in the Northeast. You can do your teacher training in the Northeast, son, if your heart's set on it. It still doesn't convince him. By the 16th, the Lurgan Mail's talking again. They're telling us that everything is in place and it's purely down to the player, but he is now stalling. He'd gone back to Ireland for a few days. He'd stayed in a hotel whilst he was preparing for an important game. But they're under the impression that really he's not rushing to sign to become a professional. Again, the paper gets brought back up on the paper gets brought back up in the papers on the 19th of February. There's a title in Belfast called the Newsletter. They're just regurgitating the facts by this point, although they're falling down on the side of being confident that Dowd will come to Sunderland. They suggested that the only reason he hadn't signed yet was because out of a sense of loyalty for Glenavon, they had a big cup tie coming up and he was wanting to stay to appear in that for them before joining Sunderland. So there's all sorts of different stories and different angles coming to this. Nobody quite knows where they stand. The clubs are happy for it to happen, but there just keeps being another reason why Dowd doesn't sign on the dotted line. The Belfast Telegraph on the 20th, they say that the hesitancy is down to him not wanting to go full time. Not necessarily about whether he can continue his studies or not in his spare time, but whether he wants to become a professional footballer. They predict, this is the Tuesday the 20th, they predict that the story will be resolved one way or other by the weekend. The Newsletter paper, they state that the player had agreed personal terms They're also now saying that the fee has been argued down to £7,000, which is what St Mirren had offered and been knocked back for. So contradictory information wherever you read. Nobody seems to have a full handle of what's happening. The weekend comes and the Newry Reporter, another paper which has an interest, another paper based in Northern Ireland, they now mention unknown snags that are nothing to do with whether he can stay at college. They're saying there's other hiccups in the story and there's fresh issues to try and come round. So, Sunderland must be getting pretty frustrated by now. They're saying, well, listen, we've shown you the teacher training facilities. We've agreed personal terms with you. We've agreed terms with your club. What's going on? Why are you not coming here? The 23rd, it's now the Lurgan Reporters' time to update everybody. They are confident at this point that it's going to be dealt with within 24 hours and he's going to become a Sunderland player. Still doesn't happen though. Dowd had committed himself to playing in a derby game against Portadown the following afternoon. He'd requested that in the boardroom prior to the game, prior to kickoff, he'd requested that he'd be allowed to speak to Sunderland, but in private. Seems a bit peculiar because Glenavon knew all about the deal and were happy to let it happen. For some reason, though, the meeting takes place, and then this unknown mystery injury stops him from playing in the game against Portadown. So I don't know what's happened in that conversation because he was all set to talk to Sunderland, he was all set to play for Glenavon, and then suddenly this hitherto unknown injury appears. The manager, his current manager, Eric Adair, says in one of the papers, one thing is certain, we'll know exactly what is happening tomorrow. Well, he's put the kiss of death on that because we don't know what's happening. Nothing happens after the Portadown game. Nothing happens on the Sunday. On the Monday, this mystery injury is mentioned and the injury is suddenly put back a week. The newsletter title, they're claiming the situation between the clubs has not soured, but there is a feeling that people are starting to get a bit anxious by this. I mean, you two listening to me talking about this story are probably getting pretty fed up with it. So God knows how people felt at the time. 2nd of March, we go back to the Lurgan Mail. They're evidently sick of it. They just have a very tiny piece on the back page that just says, end of a saga, ? Sorry, fans, but it's not our fault. Here we go in the continuing saga of transfer prospect Hugh Dowd. Installment 5 starts here and with a bit of luck should end the boring serial. Everything between Glenavon and Sunderland has been settled and Dowd is definitely to make up his mind tomorrow. But he doesn't make up his mind. On the Saturday, the next day, there's a paper called Ireland Saturday Night, and they have a little snippet that says, Sunderland's Irish representative, Tommy Coulter, had talks with Dowd and Glenavon manager Eric Adair at Mournview Park today, but again, the deal didn't go through. That piece talks about Ferguson being desperate still to get him over the line. I mean, Sunderland are showing remarkable patience. We're 2 months down the line here now. The deal's not been done, but we keep pushing. We need bodies in. And rather than go and look elsewhere to help with this injury crisis, we're still pushing for Dowd. So Sunderland must have been absolutely enamoured by this lad and utterly convinced he was going to be the man that would solve all these problems. Then, finally, 5th of March, 2 months to the day we win the cup, it is finally reported that this on-off deal is dead. The player informs Sunderland he doesn't want to go to Sunderland, and the whole incident is referred to as a big slap in the face for Glenavon, who by that point had actually come into a bit of a sticky situation and were in desperate need of the cash. 9th of March, the Lurgan Mail follows this up, and they're saying that the situation could still change and that the deal could still be back on, particularly if he does get his qualifications. Sunderland might make a return bid for him. Then, on the 5th of May, 1973, the day of the cup final, you'd think all the talk would be about Sunderland and this remarkable story where they're taking on Leeds. But the Irish press is saying this deal might still happen. It's mad. Why is the saga of signing a part-time player taking precedence over the cup final that day? It's staggering. Dowd has indicated to Glenavon that if something doesn't happen, he's going to go and play in the Cheshire League the following season. So, what? You're turning down the cup finalists, and if you can't go to the cup finalists, you're like, oh well, I'll just play amateur football still. It's staggering. Glenavon are feeling as if they've been left in the lurch because he hasn't moved on. He hasn't allowed them to get a transfer fee. Because he's amateur, they can't stop him going to the Cheshire League if he decides to. He's apparently gone quiet on them and is no longer communicating with them. So they're in the dark. But this thing about sliding doors, you talk about a lad who could be joining the most talked about club in the country. And it looks like he might be staying non-league. The 12th of May, a week after we've won the cup, it's still a story in the Irish press. They're talking more about this than they are this remarkable story in London the previous week. They have Sunderland down as being due to make yet another approach. It goes quiet. Sunderland are seemingly now finally as sick as Glenavon. They're probably thinking, listen, we're coming to you as the FA Cup holders, and you're still not convinced you want to come here. We're done with you. And yet by the end of May 73, he's quite happy to talk to both Peterborough and Bolton Wanderers. So suddenly this idea that he wants to continue his studies or remain part-time, that's gone on the back burner. I don't know what problem he has with Sunderland. He mustn't have liked the cuisine on Wearside during this trial, because he seems adamant he's not going to come here. The following season, he suddenly kisses and makes up with Glenavon, plays for them. He plays so well that in June 1974, he gets called up for the senior Northern Ireland international team. He plays for them in the home championships while still being part-time. And in July 74, he ends up going to Sheffield Wednesday for 30 grand. So Glenavon are probably happy in the end because they've suddenly more than trebled the money they were expecting to get from him. Luton Town have come on the scene. They were in the top flight. They had been sniffing around, but he decides he doesn't want to go to Luton either. He goes to Sheffield Wednesday, who were in the same division as Sunderland were when they were desperate for him. This guy obviously is not for... you can't get in his head. You can't convince him to do something if he doesn't want to do it. It's obvious that he's not necessarily driven by playing for the highest club in the pyramid or for the most successful club. He wants to go to a club that he feels suits him. He makes his debut for Sheffield. He has 5 decent-ish years for them. He's never a regular for them, but makes over 100 appearances. He does get to play at Roker Park. He plays for Sheffield Wednesday twice in October 1974, both at Hillsborough and at Roker. We win both of those games, but teammates for him in the colours of Sheffield Wednesday whilst he's playing for the Owls. Teammates from across those two games include Ken Knighton, who becomes our manager, Roger Wilde, who signs under Len Ashurst. We spoke about Len Ashurst earlier. And Fred McIver, who was a Berkeley lad who only ever made one appearance for Sunderland earlier on in the decade, that conversely was against Sheffield Wednesday. So there's a few Sunderland links for him at Hillsborough whilst he's there. After his spell with them, he goes in August 1979 to Doncaster Rovers. He's captain for them when they win promotion out of Division 4 in 1980-81 season. And to just tie this up in a nice little bow, do either of you want to tell me who the manager was of Hugh Dowd when he played for Doncaster Rovers?
Laurie McMenemy.
No, not a bad shout, though. Not a bad shout. Any guesses, Kelvin?
You need to take yourself off mute to give the answer. Unless you want to do sign language.
Well, if he
Not
gives
that
the
answer,
answer,
sign language.
if he gives the answer whilst on mute, he can claim afterwards. Oh, aye, that's what I said. I got it right.
So was
Who'd
it Stan Anderson?
No, not Stan Anderson.
Another
Jackie Charlton.
No,
is a Sunderland connection.
Well, not quite. There's a connection to Leeds United. This is a fella who
Billy
could
Bremner.
have played Billy Bremner. He could have played against Billy Bremner in the 1973 Cup final if he'd played his cards right and things had all aligned and the stars were all in place for him. He could have played against Billy Bremner in one of the most famous football games of the decade, but instead he ends up being managed by him at Doncaster Rovers. So Hugh Dowd, amongst all of the weird and wonderful stories happening in the town when Sunderland got to the Cup final in 1973, and everybody wanted to talk about Sunderland, everybody, like our good friend George Foster used to say, wanted a ticket for the game. Hugh Dowd was the only fella in football who thought, nah, do you know what? I'm not gonna sign for Sunderland at the moment.
Well, if you is listening, you can get in touch with us by emailing hawaythepodcast@safc@gmail.com and let us know what was going on and give us his version of events.
Please do, and I'll bet you this. His version will be a lot shorter and a lot more succinct than my version. So thank you for sticking with me, everybody, listening to that little transfer tale.
That's quite right. We're going to take a short break now while we have a bit of a Google search for Hugh Dowd, and we'll be back very soon.
The Lincoln Spring Sales Event is on now, and there's never been a better time to experience the feeling of driving a Lincoln. Pictures, sunlight through the available panoramic vista roof, music, weather, and maps on the 48-inch panoramic display, and a drive so smooth that inspiration rides up front. Stepping out better than you got in. That's the Lincoln feeling. Get behind the wheel of the 2026 Lincoln Nautilus SUV and discover exceptional offers only at your local Lincoln retailer.
This episode is brought to you by Stouffer's. Here comes three-time juggling champion Natalia Rogers. She's juggling law school, her TA job. Oh, narrowly catches the laundry. What's that fourth ball? Parents unexpectedly showed up at dinner time? Is that too much for Natalia? Not with Stouffer's Chicken Alfredo and its mouth-watering mix of Asiago, Romano, and Parmesan. When you're juggling four things at once and the clock strikes dinner, think Stouffer's.
Welcome back to Haway The Podcast for the final part of this week's episode of On This Week. March 8th, 1933, we've talked a lot today about big crowds and record attendances. And on this day, in the FA Cup quarter-final against Derby in 1933, the official record attendance at Roker Park was set 75,118 in a game that we lost, unfortunately, 1-0. 1958, Sunderland drew 3-3 with Sheff Wed. Don Kirchenbrand, the Rhino, scored an equaliser on his debut. Alan O'Neill, who we've talked about previously on this pod as well for being, we think, the only player to play for Sunderland under two different names. He scored 2 goals. George Aitken and Billy Elliott managed to put through their own net for Sheffield Wednesday on that occasion as well. 1986, Sunderland played a game at home against Charlton. Now, this wasn't going to make the cut until I read a little bit more about it. Steve Heskey made his debut, which isn't enough really to get into the episode on this week. Mark Proctor got our goal. But the interesting thing from this game was a clearance by Alan Kirbishley, who was playing for Charlton, knocked out the referee Peter Tilsley, and he had to get carried off the field, and his linesman had to take over. And the score was 0-0 when Alan Kirbishley leathered the ball at the referee. I'm not sure if the referee did something to annoy him or he just got in the way, but yeah, the referee got knocked out by the football.
Considering the amount of tangents we take, Steve Heskey listening to this thinking, here's my week, here's my debut, going to mention the fact that it was going to be dropped from the running order until there was that interesting side story about the referee and Alan Kirbishley. He must be gutted. He must be thinking, dear me, was I that insignificant to Sunderland?
Sorry, Steve, but yeah, if you know Hugh Dowd, give you a knock and tell him to give us an email. And 1997, Sunderland beat Manchester United 2-1 at Roker Park. Mickey Gray and John Mullen got the goals on that occasion, and Andy Melville put through his own net just to make things a little bit interesting in the closing stages. Now, for our final big thing we're going to look at this week, we're going to go all the way back to 1977. Now, Sunderland hadn't won a league game since sort of mid to late November. We'd gone, 11, 12 games without a win. We'd then scored one goal against Bristol City, which had made it 2 goals in 11 or 12 games. We hadn't been hitting the back of the net with any sort of regularity. And then if you were listening to the podcast a couple of weeks ago, Kelvin described a 4-0 win against Middlesbrough when the floodgates opened. A few days later, the floodgates had been left open because we turned West Bromwich Albion over 6-1. So from going from scoring 2 goals in 12 games, or whatever it was, to 10 in 2, it's a complete turnaround. And then we took on West Ham United, Kelvin.
We did. We took on West Ham United. It was about a week and a half after the West Brom game. I think, if memory serves me well, we had a little break and played no football, and then took West Ham United on. And after what we'd seen in the previous 2 games, you would think that we would be coming looking for a goal fest. But honestly, the way the season had been, I can tell you, I was walking up them Fulwell End steps thinking, if we can score 1 goal in the 89th minute and it bounces off Mel Holden's big bony arse, that will do me for the sake of getting the points. What we got though was the stuff of dreams and the making of legends. I tell you, it's this 3-game odyssey and 3-game goal fest came to a finish. I always remember about that day. There was a really strong wind blowing over Roker Park, and if you ever watched games at Roker, you'd know that you were a little subject to the wind, and the wind could ruin a game. A lot of people, some people might have seen that weren't actually at the game, might have seen the Crystal Palace game, cup tie in 1975. It was the only game we lost at home, and that day the wind was blowing and really unsettled the football that we had been playing that day. Well, it was the same again. The wind was blowing. It was blowing towards the Fulwell End, and Sunderland chose it was blowing from the Fulwell End in the faces of Sunderland, who chose to kick towards the Fulwell End. And the other issue that you had at 3:00 on a Saturday afternoon was that if the sun was high in the sky, you had the sun peeking over the top of the Fulwell End as well in your face. So we had strong wind, bright sunshine, and we chose to play into that in the first half. And my earliest memory of this, and if you can get this game's highlights on, I think the big match highlights are available on this game, was a foul by Big Bill Green, who played centre-half for West Ham the day. I have to say, West Ham rolled in. We weren't the only ones on a good run. West Ham did roll in. They hadn't lost their last 3 games. Now, they had some really good players. Alan Durban, Trevor Bruggen, John Radford, and Billy Jennings playing up front for them. That Billy Jennings always gave us trouble when we played against him. And they had Frankie Lampard and Billy Bones playing at the back for him too. Sturdy customers, them two. And a good young goalkeeper called Mervyn Day in goals. He was young, but he was highly regarded. So they were no mugs, West Ham, although they had been struggling a bit towards the bottom end of the table. But they'd won the last 3 games. Game kicks off. Big Bill Green playing for West Ham at centre half. In the very first, minute and a half, 2 minutes in, decides to lay his mark on Mel Holden and hacks him in sort of the midfield, West Ham's midfield, brings him down and kind of catches him unawares. Like he almost gives him, he hurts his neck, and clatters him from behind. And there are 2 things I remember about that free kick. One is a goal comes from the free kick, from the award of the free kick within the first 3 minutes. And the second thing was the full end blasting out and suggesting that Bill Green was fatherless, he was dirty, and he was a cockney. The sun was blasting out from the full end. And I always remember laughing about that because they got 2 of them things wrong. Okay. I'm pretty sure I'd read before the game that his dad was coming to watch the game. And Bill Green wasn't a cockney. He was born in Newcastle and he went to my school.
Ah.
And he was a bit older than me, but I'd seen pictures of him up on our football team board at school and everything, and a wee bit of a write-up on him. So I knew that he wasn't a cockney. I would probably agree that he was a dirty bugger, but they got 2 out of 3 wrong. And I was still laughing about that when we scored. So first goal, goal number 1 on 3 minutes. The free kick's taken. Mervyn Day grabs it, takes a couple of steps out and lays the ball off to John Radford. And Radford steps forward, and it all looks pretty calm, pretty no worries kind of thing. Radford steps forward, and Gary Rowell just comes pressing in. It's like, in those days, I think I've said this before, there were players that were really good at pressing, but we didn't coach pressing, and we never did it as a team. It was like Joe Bolton would go herring after somebody. Gary Rowell wasn't actually too bad at this. He would watch and wait his moment and like pounce on the player, pretend that he wasn't going to do anything, and then spin round and pounce. And that's exactly what he did with John Radford. And he intercepted this pass on the edge of their box, left-hand side. And he dinks this pass into Mel Holden. And he like curls it round Billy Bonds. Billy Bonds is still in the box. He like curls it round Billy Bonds. And like the ball just sits up for Mel Holden rushing in. And the big giraffe just rushes in and smashes it past Mervyn Day in the goals. And if I've got there's a lot of memories about Mel Holden, but my memory of him scoring and his celebration is what he does after he scores that goal in the first couple of minutes, and he walks behind the goal and lifts his hands up, and he's a massive boy. He's 6'2.5" or something, Mel Holden, and he's got his hands in the air, acclaiming the goal to the full will end. It's just a marvellous moment when you think of, a young life ended early, which his was, and tragically early. But I always think of him in that regard and scoring that goal. So we've scored another early goal like we did against West Brom, and it just sets the whole crowd away. Here we go again. Here we go, a goal in the first 3 minutes. Marvellous. Goal number 2 comes along on 9 minutes, and we have the marvellous sight of goal scorer Mel Holden doing a sidestep over and beating his man for pace on the left wing. Something you hardly ever saw. Mel Holden had a lot of attributes, but pace and step overs weren't his attributes. Steps over, bursts, gets away from his marker, fires a cross that's cleared just about up to the halfway line. And our debutant, Colin Waldron, who has been bought in from Man United. He'd made his name at Burnley as a centre half. He'd been brought in to try and cover for the Jeff Clarke absence. They realised by this point that Clarkie's injury was long term, so they bring Waldron in. He slides a pass to Bobby Kerr on the right hand side of the box. Kerr's got his back to goal, and instead of, like, you would think that he was just going to take the ball and lay it off again, he had a defender at his back. He sort of positions himself and back heels it towards the touchline, and Kevin Arnott, who'd kept moving, he was sort of in transit, gets the ball at the touchline, slings it across into the box, and Gary Rowe puts it into the back of the net in the way that he always did, in that characteristic way, I would say to you, that we came to recognise. 2-0, 9 minutes in, and we are roaring, thinking there's going to be more here. And West Ham looked all over the place. But it took until 30 minutes in a Kerr corner for the next goal. That ball again was cleared out to Waldron. This was one of his skills. He wasn't the quickest of centre-halves, Colin Waldron, but he was canny on the ball. He could get the ball to where he wanted it to go. He was very, very good at that. And what he does is he picks this ball up and lobs it to Mel Holden on the edge of the 6-yard box. And Holden's standing there unmarked. He's 6'2.5". He lobs the ball to him, and Holden just nuts the ball in the back of the net for his brace. Within 30 minutes, 3-0. We take those 3 goals into half time. Shortly after half time, Mel Holden, game kicks off again. We're going with the wind now, and I'd seen us sometimes not manage the wind very well when we had it. The ball would be running out of play, passes over hit, but actually we managed both halves brilliantly. We played against the wind really well, and then we played with the wind really well. And Mel Holden, he almost scores his hat-trick. There's a ball again gets played into a crowded box, and then he's got his back to goal with defenders behind him. And instead of trying to turn or lay it off, he does what Bobby Kerr did earlier, back heels it. And I'm telling you, I was in the Roker end that day. That ball, he missed his hat-trick by an inch. That ball trickled by the post. And I mean, Mervyn Day was scampering across his goals. He'd never seen it come through this ruck of players. I wish he had got the hat-trick that day, Holden. It was a cracking attempt from the big man. Anyway, goal number 4 comes on 56 minutes. And they make the same mistake again. Day rolls the ball out to Green, remembering that now West Ham are kicking into the wind. He squares a short pass to a lad called Kevin Locke on the edge of the box, and Mel Holden does a Joe Bolton and charges at Kevin Locke. He's sort of got his back to him, meandering off into the distance, and then just turns around and races at him. And Locke, in a bit of a panic, tries to square the ball back to Green, but only manages to put it right in Bobby Kerr's shooting line. And I have to say, Kerr, he does use the wind, and he smashes the ball from the edge of the box. And it's one of them crackers that goes in off the bar, you know, it hit the bar and hit the back of the net, you know, and if the net hadn't been there, I'm going to tell you, it would have hit me in the face. That's how hard he hit it. He had a ferocious shot on him, Bobby Kerr, when he let fly. 4-0, we're in seventh heaven. Well, we're in fourth heaven, but we're heading in that direction. 64 minutes, and then we get what I was talking about earlier. We get a Joe Bolton press, and I used to love to watch Joe haranguing and harassing a boy with the ball, and he chooses Billy Bonds to go and harass. Now, this boy had as ferocious a reputation as Joe Bolton had for us. So you're looking at two hard laddies about to go up against each other. But I said donks ago in one of these episodes when we're talking about Joe Bolton, he used to press really, really well. He didn't used to bluter through people. He would get up people's backsides and not foul them, but make it really difficult for them. And actually what he ends up doing is almost corralling Billy Bonds into the corner by the corner flag. And I'm thinking we're going to get a throw-in or a corner here because Bonds hasn't got he's a great defender, but he's not a skillful laddie, you know. And sure enough, the ball goes out at the corner. But Joe's got his thinking cap on because he follows the ball out, picks it up, turns round and takes a quick throw in. Bob Lee's got his thinking cap on. You know, he wasn't the greatest, he wasn't the most aggressive of players, Bob Lee, but he was quick and he was quick in the mind and he was a clever footballer. And he runs in for the throw and almost makes a reverse pass through the defender's legs that's at his back. And it's right in the channel that none other than Gary Rowell's running. And at the angle that I was watching that goal, I knew he was going to strike it. And at that point, we hadn't seen Gary Rowell play loads, but already the people that had seen him play were anticipating this lad's got a lovely way of striking the ball. And, you know, he seems to always get his shots on target, you know. And he put it in between Mervyn Day and the post from a very, very acute angle. It was that acute. It hit the side netting across the far side of the goal. That's what the angle was like. It was such a Gary Rowell goal, you know. The ball always ran so smoothly when he hit it, you know. But he was on the move as soon as Joe picked the ball up to throw it, Rowley was on the move for that, and obviously anticipated that Bob Lee would try and lay it off to him. So it was a lovely goal. Cracking goal, 5th goal, 5 goals, you know. We'd seen 6 the game before, we'd seen 4 the game before that. This just happens every week at Roker Park, you know. And the crowd are going bonkers. So they are. Goal number 6, that comes 5 minutes from the end. West Ham, by this point, they were dishevelled. You know, that defence was all over the place. I do think that the wind was a little bit of a factor, but I think what was more a factor was our young team was absolutely shackles off and just going for everything, you know. It was a great long ball out of defence by Mick Doherty. He had this in his armoury. He could throw a pass from distance. And he put that ball right into a gaping hole in the middle of the West Ham defence. I don't know where the hell the centre-backs were, but it was a gaping hole. And Bob Lee just ran onto it. And I think the West Ham defence were anticipating offside, but he wasn't. And he just ran on, and Mervyn Day come flying out to him. And Lee, he was really clever because Day did come at speed out to him. And from about the edge of the box, he hits it with his right foot and hits it with like the outside of his right foot and sort of curls it round Day and into the back of the net. I mean, it was just a perfect bloody ending to a fantastic. I mean, we didn't know that the high 3 goal scoring games were going to finish, but it was the perfect ending to the 3-game saga. And for Bob Lee, you know, I think I'd said the previous week, I think he'd scored 4 goals all season, and then he scored 4 goals in 2 games. Well, he ends up scoring 5 goals in 3 games. Gary Rowell got a brace, you know, and he'd scored 4 goals in 3 games. And Mel Holden, he scored 5 goals in 4 games because he got that squaffy goal against Bristol City. It was a stunning goal fest and turnaround in form that we'd witnessed in them 3 games. You know, Borough, West Brom, West Ham. 16 goals, just fantastic. Witness would also, by the time the 6th goal went in, would pulled ourselves up to 5th bottom by stint of goal difference. We'd been at the bottom since we'd been in the relegation places since September, and we'd been at the bottom since December. And there we are, we're 5th bottom by stint of goal difference, and we'd gone literally from being relegation certainties with all the pundits asking who's going down with Sunderland to 3 games later, people are looking at it and going, "Oh, yeah, Sunderland are gonna make it." My view of this period, though, those 3 games were marvellous. But I'll say to you again, I know I hinted at it when I was talking about this a couple of weeks ago. You could see that things were improving, that performances were improving as early as January the 3rd. And that was Mick Doherty's debut, January the 3rd. We lost that game to Coventry 1-0, but it was a much clearer, much better performance. We had a hard-earned draw against Stoke, who were nobody's mugs then, and an excellent 0-0 draw at Arsenal. And I saw both of those games. I was at Arsenal that day for that 0-0 draw, and we should have won that game. We should have won that game. That we didn't was probably more down to the kind of season that we'd had and the confidence season that we'd had. And then we had that slogfest on the Friday night against Bristol City and Mel Holden's squaffy headed goal, you know. And then we cut loose with the 16 goals. We lost 3 games from January the 22nd to May the 19th. 3 games from January the 22nd to May the 19th. It was title winning form that we stepped into there. It's one of my favourite periods in watching Sunderland ever. And despite the fact that we fail at the final hurdle in that 2-0 defeat at Goodison Park in the very last game of the season, I've got very, very fond memories of, you know, Charlie's Angels, the 3 young lads, our 2 beanpoles up front, Super Mail and Bob Lee, Mick Doherty and Joe Bolton, the 2 fullbacks. You wouldn't want to take them 2 on up a dark alley, I tell you. And then Bobby Kerr fleeing around, Jackie Ashurst, who you mentioned earlier, Andrew. Jackie Ashurst played a real part in this. And Adamson's loan move for Colin Waldron, who played his debut in this game. That was a sharp bit of action from Adamson. Waldron actually brought something to the party that almost paid off. C'est la vie, as Reggie Slibbery would say.
That is a very fitting way to end that trilogy of games, Kelvin. A very important period, I guess, from your perspective as a supporter, and a very enjoyable one, and one of those where we're probably only a couple of players away from doing something really good, eh?
Yeah, there was the makings of a team. There really was the makings of a team, and the young lads were giving you great hope. You know, I've said before, I thought Mick Doherty was a great player and could do good business for us. You know, Joe Bolton, solid, sound as a pound. Jeff Clark was good, get him back in. Sean Elliott, I couldn't make my mind up whether he was better at centre-half or better in the middle of the midfield, because he just did business in both. He was a cracking player, Sean Elliott, for Sunderland. So lots of reasons to be cheerful and to be hopeful. And coming out of those games, as I say, we lost 3 games between January the 22nd and May the 19th, I think it was. Fantastic period to watch Sunderland playing football. Home and away. I never missed a game from the turn of the year that year. It's fantastic.
Very good. And one person who would also have been at that game, and pretty much every game from 1959 onwards, there's a chap called George Baker, Andrew, and I know you wanted to pay tribute to him because George passed away, sadly, last week.
Yes, thank you. Just a couple of words. George Baker was tunnel steward at the club for many, many years. Like you say, he'd first started working for us in the 50s. He was there in the Roker Park era. He was there in the Stadium of Light era. Sadly, he's passed away recently, and people who were at the Fulham game recently might have noticed there was a minute's applause for him before the teams came out. And that was a nice thing because he was this huge part of Sunderland's history. He was alive 1932 to 2026. I was thinking earlier, you know, when Kelvin was talking about the bedlam at Roker Park ahead of that 1964 game against Man United, I was wondering what George's involvement was that day, and whether the players were happy that he was on duty as a tunnel steward, because he was a big fella, and they were perhaps pleased to know that he was on hand to stop any surges getting through to the changing rooms somehow. But yeah, we've lost a couple of stalwarts recently. I mean, George Foster passed away, and there was a lad called Andy Edmonds, who, another long servant of the club. He'd been one of the people who worked in the press lounge on match days. He'd done that role since 1988. I don't think we've spoken about him on the pods recently either, but these are people who were instrumental to how the club operates and how the club was seen by other visiting clubs and things like that. Yeah, I only knew Andy to nod to, but I was fortunate enough to speak to George a couple of times, and sometimes there'd be a photo of him in the programme, or sometimes he'd be in the background on a match day, you know, in the footage. He's like, I don't know, just this giant of a bloke in size and statues, like a lovely fella, very friendly. He could be discreet when he needed to be. I think he probably saw one or two things happening behind the scenes that could very easily have made the papers, but he's kept quiet. You know, emotions are high in the tunnel.
Yeah, they've seen a hell of a lot, won't he, in the tunnel over 60 odd years.
Yeah, exactly. But he was that face who often welcomed the players as they came to the stadium and they were going into the changing rooms. Nice bloke. You'd want him on your side if it kicked off. Don't get us wrong. He was this fella who'd worked in the shipyards, but he wasn't a thug or anything. He represented the club brilliantly, as did Andy. And just, I don't know, I just wanted to recognise that there's people here who've served Sunderland for so long, and Sunderland have been a passion of theirs, and you know, you want to remember these people. It was quite telling that when Andy Edmonds passed away, he even got a mention on 5 Live, on like live national radio, because a couple of the commentators were like, "He is this bloke." Every time I saw that I'd been posted to Sunderland, I was pleased because I knew I'd get to catch up with this fella who was always giving us a warm welcome, and George as well was so fondly thought of by neutrals. If you get chance on BBC Sounds, Rob Mason talks really nicely about George in a podcast on there. It's only a few minutes, but a couple of funny stories about him on that. And best wishes to the loved ones. These people are much more important to Sunderland and a part of what I want this club to be than some of the people who are passing through. They're just gems, and it's a shame. Shame we've lost them.
It certainly is, but very nicely put. Thank you for that. And just before we wrap up, do you have a question for people to ponder on for next week?
Yes. Next week, we should be doing the 9th to the 15th of March, if I've got my dates right.
Correct.
Good. Thank you, because I mucked up the quiz question last week, so that's a relief. 1988, the 14th of March, England under-15s hosted their Brazilian counterparts at Roker Park. There were 3 future Sunderland players that took part in the match. Keen to know if anybody is aware of who they are. I will give you a clue. They were all English. None of the Brazilian lads ended up signing for Sunderland, but 3 of the England players got to play for Sunderland once they'd made it into senior football.
Emerson Thome would have been a good wild card to have in that team, wouldn't he?
Ooh. I might just double check that just to make sure he was nowhere near the travelling party, just to be sure.
Ika was the other one, wasn't he?
Yes.
Hey, it could be a couple. It could be 5. There we go. We'll leave you to ponder on that one. So all that leaves me to do is say thank you very much, Andrew.
Thank you. And as always, thank you for indulging me on some of my long and at times seemingly never-ending stories.
And thank you very much, Kelvin.
Thanks for having us. I thought it was a lovely warm applause for George Baker at the Fulham game, by the way. There's loads and loads of people around me stood up and gave him the acknowledgement, I thought. So very, very nice, and nice words, Andrew, about George.
Excellent. We will be back, of course, next week with another episode of On This Week, and we'll be back tomorrow with another podcast as we build up to the weekend's game. And of course, there'll be plenty of stuff on rokerreport.sbnation.com. But until next time, it's goodbye from us.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. I don't know if you knew this, but anyone can get the same premium wireless for $15 a month plan that I've been enjoying. It's not just for celebrities. So do like I did and have one of your assistants switch you to Mint Mobile today. I'm told it's super easy to do at mintmobile.com/switch.
Upfront payment of $45 for 3-month plan, equivalent to $15 per month required. Intro rate first 3 months only, then full price plan options available. Taxes and fees extra. See full terms at mintmobile.com.